You're listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now present our program, Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, with your host, Roy Showman.
Hi, this is Roy Showman, and you're listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, the show on Radio Maria that celebrates the Jewish roots of the Catholic faith, or seen the other way around, that celebrates the completion, the fulfillment, the full realization of the promises of Judaism in the Catholic Church and its sacraments. Now, this is a very, very beautiful time of the year to be celebrating that, because it is, of course, Eastertide, and Easter is the point in the year that most vividly illustrates the transition, the transformation of Judaism into the Catholic Church and its sacraments. And so that's what I was going to talk about today. In fact, I'm going to talk about a couple of things around that. One is the Easter liturgy, in particular the Easter Vigil liturgy of Saturday night going into the midnight mass on Easter Sunday, and how intensely that portrays the transformation from Judaism into the Catholic Church and the sacraments. And of course, one of the things that takes place during that Easter Vigil traditionally is the baptism of new Catholics, catechumens, adult converts to Catholicism. And it is no coincidence that the baptism should take place at that very precise point in the liturgical year, and that fact itself underlines the transformation of Judaism into Catholicism at that point in the liturgical year. So I'll talk about that also. And then, because I'll be talking about baptism, I plan to perhaps talk about some experiences of Jews who entered the Catholic Church and their baptismal experiences, so to speak, and just what that meant to their souls as they perceived it. So that's my plan for today. Before I get started, two things. One is, in about a week and a half, I'll be leaving for another pilgrimage that I lead in the Holy Land in Israel, a kind of Jewish roots and of the Catholic Church pilgrimage. So we'll be leaving on the in about 10 days, and we're going to be there for about 12 days. So I invite prayers, actually, because it is such a gift to be able to be in the Holy Land and to be in the footsteps of Jesus and to be in all of these holy places praying. And it's very important to God, which also means it's very important to the enemy of God to not allow that to happen. So there's always an intense amount of spiritual warfare around praying in the Holy Land and leading pilgrimages to the Holy Land. So, of course, the only real weaponry against spiritual warfare is prayer. So I am soliciting your prayer support for the pilgrimage. There's already been a fair amount of warfare that has begun around the pilgrimage, so I need all the help I can get. But with that, let me go to the main part of today's show, which is, let me just jump in, I guess, and talk about Easter. Now, I frequently talk about the connection between Passover and Good Friday and Passover and Easter, so I don't want to belabor that too much. But I'll just start with the classic description of the meaning of the Exodus from Egypt. Now, the Exodus from Egypt is, of course, the story of Passover. Passover is a celebration of the Exodus from Egypt. And from the very first generation of Christians, the story of the Jews' Exodus from Egypt was seen as a prefigurement of the coming of Christ. In Jewish theology, by the way, the Exodus from Egypt is seen as a foreshadowing, a prefigurement of the coming of the Messiah. So it's logical that the early Christians should have carried that over, but also it's just evident from the story itself how intensely the story of the Exodus from Egypt is a picture in advance of the coming of Jesus. So just to recap that very briefly, the slavery of the Jews to the Pharaoh in Egypt was a picture of mankind, all of mankind's slavery to Satan. As the Jews escaped the power of Pharaoh by crossing through the waters of the Red Sea, the Christian escapes the power of Satan by passing through the waters of baptism. So Pharaoh was a picture of Satan, the Jews escaped from the power of Pharaoh by passing through the wet Red Sea was a picture of the Christians' escape from the power of Satan by passing through the waters of baptism. The blood of the Lamb on the doorposts in the houses in Egypt, which turned away the avenging angel and spared the Jews from death, was a picture of the blood of Christ on the cross, turning away God's rightful judgment, sparing us from eternal death. Then the 40 years' journey through the desert to the promised land that the Jews went on was a picture of the Christian's journey through this life to the real promised land, heaven. And as the Jews were fed miraculously by the miraculous bread from heaven, manna, during their crossing of the desert, the Christian is sustained in his crossing through the desert of this life by the true miraculous bread from heaven, the Eucharist. And of course, this equation between the Eucharist and the manna from heaven that sustained the Jews was made by Jesus himself in John 6, when he said, I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread which I shall give for the life of the world is my flesh. So with that, we see, of course, that the link between the Jews crossing through the waters of the Red Sea and baptism. And it's no coincidence that the Easter Vigil liturgy, now I'm going back to the Tridentine Easter Vigil liturgy, which frankly was a lot longer than people have tolerance for nowadays. It was actually designed to last about 6 hours. And it had many, many Old Testament readings, lessons or prophecies they were referred to, before the Mass proper started. You know how we now have the Old Testament reading or the epistle reading before the Gospel reading. So we have one, or on Sunday, two Old Testament or epistle readings before the Gospel. In the Tridentine Easter liturgy, there was a slate of 12. And many of those lessons which were read were in preparation for the baptism of the catechumens, and many of those lessons which were read explicitly underlined the prefigurement of Christianity in Judaism. So you can see how the whole Easter Vigil service was designed as a catechesis, and as a catechesis which obviously not all of the catechumens were coming from Judaism, but it was a catechesis which was designed to draw from the Old Testament and from Judaism, showing the fulfillment of Judaism in Jesus. And so some of those readings in the Tridentine liturgy for Easter Vigil were Noah and the flood. The first one was the creation of the world in 6 days. The second one was Noah and the flood. And of course, Noah and the flood was a picture. I mean, I believe it happened historically, but at the same time, it was a picture of the purification of the world in some sense through water, right? To kind of refresh the world and make it acceptable to God, and be able to kind of renew mankind through Noah and his descendants after mankind as a whole had fallen sort of irredeemably before the flood. So we already have that picture of the kind of the redemption through regeneration, I should say, through water. And then the next lesson in the Easter liturgy was Abraham's binding of Isaac. I've talked about that before, but Abraham, this was the beginning of the Jewish people, and God told Abraham to sacrifice his only beloved son Isaac. Abraham took Isaac to Mount Moriah, put the wood for the sacrifice on his shoulders, led him up the mountain, bound him to the wood, and was prepared to sacrifice him when the angel of God intervened. And that was entirely a picture of, again, not that it didn't happen, but at the same time, it was a prophetic foreshadowing of Jesus' sacrifice on Mount Calvary, where God took his only beloved son, put the wood for his sacrifice on his shoulders, led him up, actually the very same mountain, because Mount Calvary and Mount Moriah are the same mountain, bound him to the cross, nailed him to the cross as Abraham had bound his beloved son Isaac to the wood for the sacrifice, and went through with the true sacrifice. So we see that lesson, that reading in the Easter Vigil, was very explicitly and dramatically a picture of the transformation from Judaism, the foreshadowing of Christianity and Judaism. And the very next lesson was the story from Exodus of the Jews crossing through the Red Sea. And so here we have the most direct precursor example of baptism, and the liturgy itself makes it clear that it is incorporating the story of the Jews crossing through the waters of the Red Sea, because what's about to happen is the baptism of the catechumens, where they are going to pass through the waters that free them from the power of Satan, as the Jews were freed from the power of Pharaoh crossing through the Red Sea. I think I'll just mention one more of the readings, which is the ninth reading, actually, was the rules for the Passover sacrifice from the book of Exodus, in which it is written that when you sacrifice the lamb, not a bone of his should be broken, which, of course, was cited by John as an explicit explicit tie-in between Jesus' death on the cross, when you remember when the soldier pierced Jesus' side with a lance to prevent the necessity, so to speak, of his legs being broken. St. John in his gospel says this was done to fulfill the prophecy, not a bone of him shall be broken, referring to the Passover lamb. So those rules for the Passover sacrifice were kind of explicitly referenced, actually explicitly given in the Easter Vigil readings, because, of course, the sacrifice of the Passover lamb was a prefigurement of the sacrifice of Jesus. And, of course, we know that from explicitly, again, from the New Testament, for instance, 1 Corinthians, Paul writes, "For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed," and so forth. So the entire story of Easter is, let me put it another way. I better back off from that. The entire story of Passover is a prefigurement of its fulfillment in the story of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, Good Friday, basically the Holy Triduum, Good Friday, actually beginning with Holy Thursday, into the resurrection on Sunday. And that is, there's no coincidence, as I said, that it is in that transformation, in the heart of that transformation, that the baptism of the new Catholics should take place. So I will go shortly into a discussion of what takes place in baptism as seen through the eyes of these Jewish converts. But before I do, I want to point out another very beautiful and very mysterious aspect of the Easter liturgy in the Catholic Church, and its echoing of the Passover liturgy. So bear with me with this, because it's a little bit confusing. But one of the most famous aspects of the Passover Seder, the Passover liturgy, is a kind of song prayer. Excuse me for that, which is a song prayer that's called the Daenu, and it is a prayer thanking God for the miracles that he performed at the original Passover during the Exodus from Egypt to save the Jews. It's in the form of a song. I will play the song. Actually, you know what? I'll start by playing the song. It's a very upbeat kind of Easter kind of a mood, as you'll see. And after the song, I will say what it says, and then I will point out the place in the Easter liturgy where there is a liturgical chant, actually, that directly echoes the Daenu, echoes the Jewish liturgy that I'm about to play, but turned around 180 degrees because, of course, although the Catholic Church is the fulfillment of Judaism, there's another way in which, I don't want to say it's a reversal of Judaism, but clearly on the Passover, 2000, or rather, whatever it is, 1985 or so years ago when Jesus was crucified, that Passover was kind of an anti-Passover, so to speak, because rather than welcoming the Messiah, which is what the Passover was all about, certainly at least the Jewish authorities rejected the Messiah and crucified him. So although it's a fulfillment, Easter is a fulfillment of the Passover, the Triduum can also be seen, at least in that instance, as a reversal of the proper Passover. And that'll become clear from the comparison of these two liturgies. So with that, let me play the Dayenu, which runs about a minute, and then I will come back and talk about it. So here we go with the Dayenu.
הוציאנו ממצרים, הוציאנו ממצרים, דיינו, 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 דיינו. Had he brought us out of Egypt, only brought us out of Egypt, he had brought us out of Egypt, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu.
Well, I hope that wasn't too raucous, but it is a centerpiece of the Passover Seder. Dayenu is simply the Hebrew for "it would have been enough for us," and this song prayer goes through the miracles that God performed for the Jews in the Exodus from Egypt. And after reciting each miracle, there is the chorus that you just heard, Dayenu, Dayenu, and so forth, which is simply "it would have been enough for us." Let me recount the miracles. Let me read through the miracles that are recounted in the Dayenu. Had he brought us out from Egypt and not executed judgment against the Egyptians, Dayenu. Had he executed judgment against the Egyptians and not destroyed their idols, Dayenu. Had he destroyed their idols and not slain their firstborn, Dayenu. Had he slain their firstborn and not given us their possessions, Dayenu. Had he given us their possessions and not divided the sea for us, Dayenu. Had he divided the sea for us and not brought us through it dry shod, Dayenu. Had he brought us through it dry shod and not drowned our oppressors in it, Dayenu. Had he drowned our oppressors in it and not sustained us in the wilderness for 40 years, Dayenu. Had he sustained us in the wilderness for 40 years and not fed us manna, Dayenu. Had he fed us manna and not given us the Sabbath, Dayenu. Had he given us the Sabbath and not brought us to Mount Sinai, Dayenu. Had he brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, Dayenu. Had he given us the Torah and not brought us into the land of Israel, Dayenu. Had he brought us into the land of Israel and not built the temple for us, Dayenu. So you can see how it goes through the various steps of the Exodus, thanking God for each one in turn. Now, I will compare it or reference to it an aspect, an element of the Good Friday traditional liturgy, which is known as the reproaches. And in it, the congregation or the ones doing the chant go through, again, the miracles through which God rescued the Jews from slavery in Egypt, goes through each one of the miracles, and with the voice of Christ, in other words, it's the reproaches are said in the first person as Christ is speaking. Christ is reproaching the Jews for how they treated him, comparing that specific, linking each of the miracles with a specific active abuse, so to speak, in the ways that the Jews treated Christ in leading him to the cross. So I am going to read the miracles, so to speak, and the responses of Jesus in the reproaches. And then I will play a recording of the reproaches, and I will have that recording then serve as the musical break, which we usually take about halfway through the show. And when we come back from that break, I'll go on to talk more about baptism and the experiences of baptism as perceived by some Jews who went through baptism and, needless to say, had a very profound experience of it. And before I do that, before I read the reproaches and go to that music, let me remind you that this is a live call-in show. The number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. Again, 866-333-6279. And if you wish to call in with a comment or a question before I go on to the baptisms, it's always a good idea to call in during the musical break. Then coming out of the break, I can see if there are any calls and take them before I go on to the second half of the show. So with that, let me read first the reproaches. There's an introductory part, of course. We worship you, Lord. We venerate your cross. We praise your resurrection. For through the holy cross you have brought joy to the world. And then there is each verse of the reproaches is like each verse of the Dayenu. The chorus, instead of being Dayenu, it would have been enough for us, is my people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. That's, of course, Jesus speaking. So here I'll go through the verses. I led you out of Egypt from slavery to freedom, but you led your Savior to the cross. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. For 40 years I led you safely through the desert. I fed you with manna from heaven and brought you to a land of plenty, but you led your Savior to the cross. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. What more could I have done for you? I planted you as my fairest vine, but you yielded only bitterness. When I was thirsty, you gave me vinegar to drink, and you pierced your Savior with a lance. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. For your sake I scourged your captors and their firstborn sons, but you brought your scourges down on me. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. I led you from slavery to freedom and drowned your captors in the sea, but you handed me over to your high priests. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. I opened the sea before you, but you opened my side with a spear. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. I led you on your way in a pillar of cloud, but you led me to Pilate's court. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. I bore you up with manna in the desert, but you struck me down and scourged me. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. I gave you saving water from the rock, but you gave me gall and vinegar to drink. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. For you I struck down the kings of Canaan, but you struck my head with a reed. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. I gave you a royal scepter, but you gave me a crown of thorns. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. I raised you to the height of majesty, but you have raised me high on a cross. My people, what have I done to you? How have I offended you? Answer me. So you see how beautifully this echoes with a kind of reversal, the Dayenu. And I'm saying this in part, all of this entire show, of course, is a prayer, I hope. That's the intention. And there's so many different dimensions to this prayer. One is a prayer of reparation to Jesus for how all of mankind has treated him, but also for how we Jews have treated him, and also, of course, a prayer around the tragedy of this, a prayer for the conversion of the Jews so that they can come to this beautiful future that Jesus died on the cross, actually, to bring them as well as the rest of mankind. However, I see, if I'm not mistaken, that we have a caller. So before playing the reproaches, let me ask, are you there, caller?
Yes, I am, Roy.
And may I ask what your name is?
Sure, Roy. This is Mike. I was on pilgrimage with you last November when we went to Israel. And
I've thought of you very much the last couple of weeks. I am using the cell phone rosary you sent me.
Oh, great. No, I've thought of you many times in the last few weeks. It's just even yesterday's gospel was just so amazing because I was thinking of the primacy of Peter when we were there at the church and at the Sea of Galilee, and all the things that we celebrate at Easter and during Holy Week are just so much more rich and meaningful. That I'll pray for your pilgrimage coming up in the next week or two, and all the pilgrims there. I had a great experience. I've been in touch with some of the pilgrims, and whoever is lucky enough to go with you is going to have many, many blessings.
Thank you, and it was a great pleasure having you along. As you know, it was you really contributed also a lot to the pilgrimage. So that was it. That was. I mean, any place else you want to go with the comment? I don't mean about the pilgrimage.
Well, it's just you've inspired me. I have ideas of more pilgrimages now. I think I waited too long. You know, the younger you go, I think that's more exciting and better for your faith life. But it's the pilgrimage itself has led me to many more thoughtful things. You really opened my eyes to Mariology with your personal testimony, and I'm much more devoted to Our Lady now than I was before I went on the trip. And even today, a friend of mine an acquaintance of mine is getting married, and it was going to be raining, and I've been playing to our Blessed Mother saying, hey, could the rain hold out until after the wedding? And lo and behold, we've got a break in the clouds. So I think she's answering our prayers even on the smallest of things. She hears us.
Well, she's a mother.
So she is our mother, and it's opened up my life to a lot of other things that I'm participating in with the Missionaries of Charity and other things. I'm just so excited to be a Catholic and to have all these opportunities. So much of it is my eyes have been opened from a pilgrimage with you. So I appreciate it, and I thank God for you and for all that you do for everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I feel a little guilty because I feel like it's a little bit of a commercial. I will say I don't know if it's too late or not. Actually, it may be too late. It may not be too late because we're leaving in about 10 days. But if somebody is all of a sudden burning with desire to join the pilgrimage, just send me an email at haveroytalk@gmail.com, and I'll see what I can do. No promises. Anyway, thank you, Mike. I look forward to talking to you off the air. And as I said, it was a great pleasure to have him on the trip. I will now go to the reproaches as it is sung traditionally in the Good Friday liturgy, and it runs actually runs about 4 minutes, so it'll take the place, as I said, of our halfway break song, and then I'll come back and talk more about baptism by recounting some miraculous baptism experiences of Jewish converts. So with that, let's go to this beautiful recording of the reproaches. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Since we're about halfway through the show, I should say, you're listening to Radio Maria. The show is Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, and with your host, Roy Showman. And this is a kind of Easter baptism show, and we've gone through some of the Easter, the Jewish precursor to Easter issue, and the finishing up sort of with the transition, with the reflection of the Dayenu and the reproaches, which I hope you enjoyed that beautiful performance, which of course was not all of the reproaches. In other words, it was edited down. And since the theme is kind of baptism, I would like to read an account, essentially, of what baptism is about, which is the conversion. I think I'll read Herman Cohen's, actually, the account of the baptism of Herman Cohen. No, I'll read the, excuse me, Alphonse Ratisbonne first. I hope I have time to get to Herman Cohen, but if not, we'll leave it for another day. So Alphonse Ratisbonne was a very wealthy Jewish aristocratic Frenchman of the middle of the 19th century, very anti-Catholic, very kind of tied up with the betterment of the Jewish people. In other words, very philanthropic in nature, and wanted to do all he could for the Jewish people. But he was very hostile to the Catholic Church. And he was in Rome as the first leg of an around-the-world trip. And he was lonely. He ran into the brother of a friend of his who happened to be Catholic. And this brother, the friend of his, took him around Rome and ended up, I will turn to his words. His name is, it's actually, I'll skip that. But I'll go to the words of the Catholic friend describing leading this anti-Catholic Jewish friend around Rome, showing him the sights. And in this leading him around Rome, they happened to enter a church where the friend, his name was Dubussier, had some business, and Alphonse Ratisbonne sat down to wait for his friend in the church. He had an apparition. It's actually the only church-approved apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Rome. He had an apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary and he had a revelation during this apparition of the seriousness of sin, the reality of original sin, and the need for baptism. And then I will go into his account. First, I'll read de Boussierre's account of what happened, and then I will go into Ratisbone's account of what happened and his hunger and thirst for baptism. So the words of de Boussiere, and so there I was, running after Ratisbone and dragging him by the hand, showing him more of the city's religious antiquities in an endeavor to impress the great truths of Catholicism upon his mind. At St. John Lateran, I showed him the bas-reliefs above the statues of the 12 apostles. On one side, one finds the Old Testament figures. On the other, their fulfillment in the person of the Messiah. He found the parallel rather clever. However, he remarked that he was more of a Jew than ever. I replied that I had perfect confidence in God's promises and was convinced that, being an honest and sincere man, he would one day be a Catholic, even if it required an angel from heaven to enlighten him. At about 1 o'clock, I had to go and make some arrangements at the Church of San Andrea della Frate for the funeral ceremony fixed for the next day. So this is when he left Ratisbone alone in the church. When I returned, I saw nothing of Ratisbone at first. Then I caught sight of him on his knees in the chapel of St. Michael the Archangel. I went up to him and touched him. I had to do this 3 or 4 times before he became aware of my presence. Finally, he turned toward me, face bathed in tears, clasped his hands together, and said with an expression that no words can describe, "How that friend of yours must have prayed for me." I was petrified with astonishment. I felt what people must feel in the presence of a miracle. I helped Ratisbone to his feet and led him, almost carrying him, out of the church. Then I asked him what was the matter and where he wanted to go. "Take me wherever you like," he cried. "After what I have seen, I shall obey." I urged him to explain his meaning, but he was unable to do so. His emotion was too strong. Instead, he took hold of the miraculous medal and kissed it with passionate emotion. He broke into tears at the thought of all the heretics and unbelievers. Finally, he asked me if I thought him mad. "Of course I am not mad," he went on, before I had a chance to speak. "I am in my right mind. Oh God, of course I am not mad." Gradually, this delirious emotion subsided, and he grew calmer, and now his face was radiant, almost transfigured. He begged me to take him to a priest, and he asked me when he could receive holy baptism, for now he was sure he could not live without it. I took him at once to the Jesuit to see Father de Villefort, who invited him to explain what had happened. Ratisbone drew out his medal, kissed it, and showed it to us, saying, "I saw her, I saw her." And again emotion choked his words, but soon he grew calmer and spoke. I shall give his own words. And now de Boussiere is going to cite the words, quote, Ratisbone's description. "I had only been in the church a moment when I was suddenly seized with an indescribable agitation of mind. I looked up and found that the rest of the building had disappeared. One single chapel seemed to have gathered all the light and concentrated it in itself. In the midst of this radiance, I saw someone standing on the altar, a lofty, shining figure, all majesty and sweetness, the Virgin Mary, just as she looks on this medal. Some irresistible force drew me toward her. She motioned to me to kneel down, and when I did so, she seemed to approve. Though she never said a word, I understood her perfectly." Brief as his account was, Ratisbone could not utter it without frequently pausing for breath and to subdue the overwhelming emotion he felt. We listened to him, awe mingled with joy and gratitude. One phrase struck us especially, so deep and mysterious was it. She never said a word, but I understood her perfectly. From this moment on, it was enough to hear him speak. Faith exhaled from his heart like a precious perfume from a casket that holds but cannot imprison. He spoke of the real presence like a man who believed in it with all his being, like a man who had experienced it. So there we have the description of his miraculous conversion experience from the friend who kind of witnessed it from the outside. Now I'll turn to Ratisbone's own description of it. He's back in the church. His friend has left him to do his errand. He's walking around, kind of just looking around at the inside of the church. And now the words of Ratisbone. I walked mechanically, looking around without stopping at any particular thought. Suddenly, the whole church disappeared. I no longer saw anything. Or rather, oh my God, I saw only one thing. How could I ever even speak of it? Oh no. Human words are totally incapable of expressing that which is inexpressible. Any description, however sublime, would only be a profanation of the ineffable truth. I was there, prostrate, bathed in my tears, my heart beating out of my chest, when Monsieur de Bussière recalled me to life. I was unable to reply to his sudden questions, but finally I grabbed the medal that I had left around my neck. I bathed with kisses the image of the Virgin pouring forth rays of grace. Oh, it was really she. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know whether I was Alphonse or someone else. I felt so entirely changed that I thought I was another self. I tried to find myself and couldn't. The most intense joy burst in the depths of my soul. I was unable to speak. I wanted to reveal nothing. I felt something solemn and sacred in me that made me ask to see a priest. I was taken to one, and it was only after receiving a direct order that I spoke to the extent possible, on my knees, and with trembling heart. My first words were acknowledgement for Monsieur de la Ferronnerie. I'll skip that. I could not account for the faith and the knowledge that I had acquired. All that I can say is that in a moment the blindfold dropped from my eyes. Not only a single blindfold, but a whole slew of blindfolds that had enveloped me disappeared rapidly, one after the other, as snow and fog and ice disappear under the influence of the burning sun. I climbed out of a tomb, an abyss of shadows, and I was alive, perfectly alive. But I wept. I saw at the bottom of the abyss the extreme misery from which I had been pulled by an infinite mercy. I shuddered at the sight of all my iniquities, and I was stupefied, moved to compassion, crushed with admiration and gratitude. I thought of my brother with an indescribable joy, but tears of pity mingled with my tears of love. Alas, so many men went calmly down into that pit, blinded by pride or indifference. They descended there to be swallowed alive in the horrible shadows. And my family, my fiancée, my poor sisters. Oh, I was torn apart with anxiety. It was of you that I was thinking. Oh, you that I love. It was for you that I offered my first prayers. Will you not raise your eyes to the Savior of the world, whose blood erased the stain of original sin? Oh, how hideous is the imprint of that stain! It renders completely unrecognizable the creature made in the image of God. I have been asked how I learned these truths, since I swear that I never opened a religious book, never read a single page of the Bible, and that the dogma of original sin, totally forgotten or denied by the Jews of today, had not for an instant occupied my thoughts. I do not think I even knew the name. How then did I arrive at this knowledge? I cannot explain it. All that I know is that I entered the church knowing nothing, and I left seeing clearly. I cannot explain the change except by comparing it to a man who awakened suddenly from a deep sleep, or to a man born blind who all of a sudden sees the light of day. He sees, but he is unable to explain the light that illumines the objects he is seeing. If physical light cannot be explained, how can one explain the light that is in essence nothing but truth itself? I believe that I am telling the truth when I say that, without having had any book learning, I glimpsed the meaning and the spirit of the dogmas of the Catholic faith. I felt these things more than I saw them, by the inexpressible effects that they produced in me. Everything was happening within me, impressions 1,000 times faster than the speed of thought, 1,000 times deeper than contemplation, not only moving my soul, but turning it around in another direction, toward a new goal and a new life. I begged my confessor and Monsieur de Bussière to keep what happened to me completely secret. I felt ready for anything, and I eagerly sought baptism. They wanted me to wait. What? I cried. The Jews who heard the preaching of the apostles were baptized on the spot, and you want me to wait after I heard the Queen of Apostles? My emotions, my violent desire, my supplications touched the hearts of these kind men who had welcomed me, and they promised me, to my everlasting joy, baptism. I could barely wait for the day fixed for the realization of this promise. So deformed did I see myself to be in the eyes of God. The day finally arrived, and it was not just a few souls, but a whole multitude of pious and charitable souls who enveloped me with such tenderness and love. I will not recount what happened on my baptism, my confirmation, and my first communion, ineffable graces that I received all the same day at the hands of His Eminence, Cardinal Patrici, Vicar of the Holy Father. So we see from this account, I mean, it's needless to say, an incredibly beautiful account, that this young Jewish man, Alphonse Ratisbonne, received the extraordinary, miraculous grace of an apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary, that she didn't speak in words, but he was infused with a tremendous amount of knowledge and understanding, as he said, 1,000 times faster than the speed of thought and 1,000 times deeper than contemplation. He saw the horror of all of his iniquities, all of his sins, all of his actual sins, but more so, he also saw the imprint, the indelible imprint of original sin on his soul, and he was filled with a burning desire as soon as possible to be baptized. He couldn't stand the thought of living with himself any longer in that state. They tried to convince him to wait for the baptism. As you know, like now, one has to wait, in general, go through RCIA in a period of at least 6 months, being prepared for baptism. They tried to do something similar to him. And he, with, if I may say so, perhaps typical Jewish chutzpah, said, "What? When the apostles preached on the first Pentecost, the Jews who heard them were baptized on the spot, and now the Queen of Apostles appeared to me and preached to me, so to speak, and you're asking me to wait?" And so he did receive permission to be, it was about 2 weeks later, baptized. And he lived out his life as a religious, and actually started a congregation in the Holy Land to pray for and work for the conversion of the Jews, because even after his baptism, especially after his baptism, he was filled with an even more intense love for his own Jewish people and desire for their welfare, which had been his desire before the baptism, but now he understood that the most important possible contribution to their welfare would be for them to come into a state of sacramental grace and intimacy with our Lord and Savior and the true Jewish Messiah, Jesus Christ. So with that, we really have come to the end of the time for our show. Let me just let me make a little footnote to what Ratisbonne did. As I said, he started a religious congregation in Israel to pray for the conversion of the Jews, and he built a convent of nuns, of sisters, to pray for the conversion of the Jews. And where did he build it? He built it on the property of the pavement in front of Pontius Pilate's palace, the very pavement where, when Jesus was condemned to death, the Jews cried, "Let his blood be." First they cried, "Crucify him, crucify him." And then when Pontius Pilate said, "I wash my hands of the blood of this just man," they said, "His blood be on us and on our children." And it was that spot that he chose for building the convent, which is still there, to pray for the conversion of the Jews. So a very beautiful end to the story of the conversion of Alphonsus Ratisbonne. And with that, we've come to the end of our show, unfortunately. So I want to thank you for listening. You've been listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with your host, me, Roy Schoeman. And I invite you in this wonderful week of prayer Of course, tomorrow is Divine Mercy Sunday. I hope other people on Radio Maria have talked to you about that, but I hope you take advantage of the extraordinary graces of Divine Mercy Sunday, which, according to St. Faustina's Revelations, and I believe endorsed by the Church, the special indulgence, so to speak, of Divine Mercy Sunday is actually the closest thing you can get to being rebaptized, to the grace of baptism. It is more than the remission of sins from confession. It is, as I said, it's the closest thing you can get to a repetition of the grace of baptism. So I invite you wholeheartedly to take advantage of the special grace of Divine Mercy Sunday. And again, to join us again next week, same time, same place, for Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria. This is Roy Schoeman saying bye for now.